Hello and welcome to Hot Issues. This week we are taking a look at Ghana's foreign policy. We're going to try and find out what the factors that underpin Ghana's foreign policy are, how has foreign policy impacted on economic development, economic and social development, and many other issues. Welcome to Hot Issues. Welcome back to Hot Issues, and this week we are taking a look at Ghana's foreign policy. What is foreign policy? What are the factors underpinning it? How does it impact on other aspects of our development? Who makes foreign policy? And so on. These are some of the questions that we're going to discuss. And we are especially privileged to have with us in the studio Her Excellency Ghana's Foreign Minister, Madam Hanna Tetteh. Madam, you're welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Kwesi. Yeah. Nice to be with you.
Yeah. What are the pillars of Ghana's foreign policy? What are the ingredients of Ghana's foreign policy?
Well, Ghana's foreign policy is primarily directed by the directive principles of state policy, which we find in the Constitution. And essentially what we are looking at with that is promoting Ghana's relationship with other countries of the world, with a focus on regional integration at a regional level within ECOWAS, at a continental level within the African Union, building strong bilateral relations with other countries of the world, playing a proactive role to promote our interests within other multilateral organizations of which we are members, promoting strong relations with Ghanaians in the diaspora. That is something that we have recently introduced. And also using the embassies and missions, the missions and consulates of Ghana, which are located in, at the moment, 57 different countries, to promote the interests of Ghana in those particular countries where they are located, and also where our heads of mission have concurrent accreditation. And the fundamental precepts are to promote the influence of Ghana within the multilateral and regional fora of which we are members, to promote one of the key precepts of our foreign policy that has been with us since independence and continues to remain with us, promoting integration, regional integration, both at the regional level within ECOWAS and at the continental level within the African Union. And at the same time, focusing on the key issues that we need to work in collaboration with other countries in order to protect our own interests. And that primarily focuses on the issue of peace and security.
Now, what goes into deciding which country we should have a mission in and not? You know, what goes into that? Why are we in 50-something countries when we could be in 100 countries?
Well, one of the factors is, of course, an issue of resources. Mm-hmm. Because once we locate a mission in a country, it means we have to maintain a staff within the country. And once you are maintaining a staff, you have a recurrent expenditure. And currently, we have just about as many missions and consulates as we can reasonably cater for. Mm-hmm. In the event that our economic circumstances were to improve, and we were able to have additional resources, then maybe there might be another maybe 4 or 5 countries which we could locate in, and the factors that would influence the choice of those countries would be as follows. The strength of the bilateral relations where we have with those countries, the economic, political, and social advantage to be derived from having a permanent mission in those countries, the presence of a significant number of Ghanaians also influences whether or not we have a diplomatic presence in a particular country, because of course once we have our nationals there in significant numbers, then we also have to be providing consular services for them. And so we try to make it easier for them to be able to access those consular services and have to travel to another country outside of the country in which they are resided to be able to enjoy those benefits. So primarily it's a strategic focus on how much actually would be derived from establishing a new mission or consulate abroad.
Are there some countries that we are not particularly friendly with? And why would that be?
We're actually friendly with, I would say, all the countries of the world. We haven't taken entrenched positions against any particular nation, but we do have certain principles. And to that extent, we stand with those principles, and we continue in our foreign policy to be consistent in the advocate of those principles. The key one being independence and freedom from colonialism for all the countries of the world. So where we find ourselves in a multilateral or regional environment, where issues to deal with liberation and the liberation struggle of peoples of a particular state are brought up for discussion, we would always support those who are looking for liberation and independence. It's part of what our founding fathers established this country on, and we continue to respect those positions. Another thing is that we also continue to promote regional integration, and therefore we will not side with any member state or group of states that looks to promote anything other than the ideal we have of having an integrated region and then an integrated continent, because those things also for us are fundamental. Respect for human rights, respect for the rule of law, and respect for the promotion of justice and peace and security within our world. So those are the things that we would consistently focus on and make sure that we do not deviate in our practice from the respect for those principles.
But in spite of that focus, Ghana continues to have very, very good relations with a country like Morocco, which is a colonial power.
Ghana has relations with a country like Morocco. You would recall that diplomatic relations were re-established, or rather an embassy. We never stopped having diplomatic relations. But the embassy of Morocco in Ghana was re-established a couple of years ago. And at the same time, we also opened an embassy in Rabat. But that notwithstanding, at the African Union, we continue to support the position of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. We also recognize the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, and indeed, as you know, they have a mission here in Accra. So notwithstanding the fact that we have an embassy with Morocco, we are consistent in respecting our principles.
What about relations with a country like Burundi, which is making the news for not so glorious reasons?
Well, we don't have a diplomatic mission in Burundi, even though we have diplomatic relations with Burundi. But our position on Burundi is quite clear, and I stated it a couple of weeks ago in an official statement that I released on behalf of the government, that as far as we are concerned, we believe that once a system has been put in place in terms of a constitutional framework for holding elections and for contestation of power, that system must be respected. And to the extent that, as has been the case over the last couple of months, there have been significant civil disturbances in Burundi as a result of the decision of the current president to contest for election once again. We have noted that we believe that the rule of law should be allowed to work, but more importantly, the citizens of the country should be protected, and the rights of the citizens must be respected, and that should come first and foremost over and above any individual's ambition.
What concretely would Ghana do in order to restore normalcy in Burundi? Concrete.
The practice that the AU has adopted over the last couple of years is that when a problem involves a particular region, it is first the leadership of the region that have the responsibility of engaging with that member state to assist the process of making sure that the protocols that we have acceded to on elections, on good governance, on democracy are respected. And so that discussion, as I understand it, has taken place within the framework of IGAD. Now, it will certainly come up this weekend when we have the AU heads of states meeting in Johannesburg. And in the event that it appears that the current government of Burundi is not very minded to pay heed to the views that have been expressed by IGAD as to the best way to handle this matter, then of course what would happen is that it would come up for discussion at the level of the heads of state at the AU plenary. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite sure that they would take a position on how to engage Burundi, as I said, in consonance with principles that we have already adopted. In concrete terms, what happens is that if indeed the decision or the position that is taken by the African Union is not respected, and therefore it is seen to go against what we have all agreed on in terms of how we should engage ourselves and how we should conduct our democratic practice, then what happens is that a series of sanctions begins to be applied.
Recently there was a meeting of the United Nations, one of its organs, which was taking a vote on the rights of Palestinians under occupation. And the report is that Ghana abstained. How come?
I'm not, quite honestly, Kwesi, I'm not privy to the issue of our abstention, but I can imagine that if that was the case, then what happened is simply because we don't yet have a substantive permanent rep at the United Nations, and our acting permanent rep may not have had a response to his request for instructions. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I'm saying that is a possibility is because we have recalled our permanent representative to the UN simply because over a period of time, someone has a diplomatic posting, and when that time elapses, we do a replacement. And usually, ambassador is appointed to a post for about 4 years. And that's the frame which we try to respect. So we have nominated a new permanent representative, but it's going through the approval process. Now, you can imagine that if someone is in an acting capacity and not a substantive capacity on any matter of that nature, they would always like to have guidance. Unfortunately, right now, I don't have a deputy. And so that puts me in a position where I'm doing a lot of multitasking, and sometimes if it's not sent, the request is not sent directly to me as an email, you know, by the time the vote has come and gone, I have not been in a position to give some direction. But I honestly don't recall being notified of a vote like this taking place.
There have been concerns about the visits to Ghana, frequent visits to Ghana, of somebody like Lieberman, the former foreign minister of Israel.
I think frequent is twice.
No, thrice.
Well, since I've been foreign minister once.
Okay.
And he's no longer the foreign minister. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that 4 years ago he also visited as foreign minister. Mm-hmm. But again, we have diplomatic relations with Israel. They have a mission here. To the extent that a visiting foreign minister wants to come to visit us and to state the Israeli position on a particular matter, we will receive him. We haven't said that we've abandoned diplomatic relations with him, and he's held that position. He's not the only Israeli diplomat that we have received.
But Lieberman is in a special category. He can't even visit some European countries because of his views and his deeds.
He couldn't. He's no longer the foreign minister, so the point is moot.
Okay. Now, Ghana has just vacated or the position of chairman of ECOWAS. How did it impact on us? Our president was chairman of ECOWAS.
Yes.
What was the impact? What were his achievements?
He was president of the ECOWAS. He was chair of the Authority of Heads of State of Governments at a very sensitive time in the recent history of ECOWAS. At the time when our president was the chair, we have had to deal with the Ebola crisis. Mm-hmm. We have also, we continue in the course of this year to have to deal with 5 elections, 3 of which are yet to take place, but certainly one of the perhaps most sensitive was the Nigerian election, which thankfully was conducted peacefully, and as all the parties involved accepted the results. and we now have a new Nigerian president sworn into office. We believe that it was undertaken successfully. The same was the case with the Togolese election. He was chair of ECOWAS at a time when the disturbances in Burkina Faso took place, which led to the resignation of President Compaoré, and working together with two of his colleague heads of state, President Macky Sall of Senegal and former President Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria, and also Dr. Chambers, the United Nations Secretary General's representative for West Africa, worked with all the various parties to agree on a transitional framework which will lead to new elections being held in October of this year. He was also chair of ECOWAS at the time when Guinea-Bissau was also going through the process of elections, which also had its own sensitivities and complications, thankfully. Those elections also took place successfully, notwithstanding the fact that there was a risk that the military might jeopardize the outcome of the election. That did not happen. And so I think that it continues to enhance our democratic credentials, that our president at the time he was chair of ECOWAS was able, working with his colleague heads of state, to ensure that under his watch, the elections that were due to take place happened in a manner that can be respected as free, fair, and transparent elections, that all the stakeholder parties involved were able to accept the outcomes, and that going forward, those particular countries have continued to be supported by Ghana as they have made progress. I would also say that with regard to the Ebola epidemic,
before we get to Ebola,
okay,
let's stay with elections for a while.
All right.
The Togolese elections.
Yes.
What was your assessment?
The constitution in Togo doesn't bar him from going for a third term, because indeed in Togo there are no term limits as at now. My understanding is that part of their debate has been an amendment of the constitution to impose term limits, which is something that indeed the Togolese people can opt to do. But as at this election, there were no limitations to prevent him from contesting elections again. And notwithstanding the fact that there was some discontent on the part of the opposition, all those who had the chance to observe the election indicated that they were largely free, fair, and transparent elections. Now, I think that when you have an opposition that is fragmented, to the extent that the Togolese opposition is fragmented, it's very difficult to mount a credible challenge to a president who is going for his third term in office. And I think that's perhaps an issue to do with their own internal politics. But the process of election itself was something that had credibility.
Is it true that ECOWAS tried to impose term limits on all the countries in the sub-region?
Well, ECOWAS can't impose, for the simple reason that ECOWAS takes its decisions by consensus. But at the last Council of Ministers meeting, we suggested an amendment to the Protocol on Governance. And in that protocol, we suggested also to the heads of state that we should adopt the position that there should be term limits. Now, again, as I've said, ECOWAS operates on consensus, which means everybody has to agree. And in this particular situation, we had a number of countries that did not agree to the amendment of the protocol to include term limits. And so unfortunately, we were not able to obtain a consensus on that.
What was the rationale in making that suggestion? I mean, if a government was popular and still enjoyed the support of the people, and there were no constitutional, stipulations insisting that they have term limits, why would you want to have term limits?
We were actually doing an amendment to the protocol on security. And we have noted that within our region, one of the issues that has been a greater source of instability has been the contestations for power. And so we thought that, and invariably, part of this struggle has come about as a result of some attempt to change the rules of a constitutional framework without reference to what actually exists and without respecting, as it were, term limits. The situation in Burkina Faso being a case in point. And when there is a situation of instability, it becomes a regional problem. It's no longer now a country problem. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was that in order to deal with some of these challenges we've had and to prevent them from taking place, in addition to the other measures that we agreed on in terms of the amendment of the protocol, we should also include with that term limits. So that's how come the discussion on term limits and the adoption of term limits as part of the ECOWAS framework was suggested.
Well, we're going to take a short break here, and we are in conversation with Her Excellency, Madam Hanna Tetteh. Hello and welcome back to Hot Issues, and we are in conversation with Ghana's Foreign Minister, Madam Hanna Tetteh. And we are looking at what goes into Ghana's foreign policy. And before we went on break, I said that we're going to ask her to tell us what Ghana did in the fight against Ebola and the specific role of His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama. What was our contribution in the fight against Ebola in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, and in Guinea?
Thank you. Well, I think that our contribution was twofold. One, as chair of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government, President Mahama showed a lot of leadership in dealing with the Ebola situation and in breaking the jinx on the isolation that the countries felt they were in at the time when the crisis was hitting hard. And one of the first things he did as chair was to go and visit them, notwithstanding the fact that there was an ongoing Ebola epidemic. Mm-hmm. And I know from each of the countries that they took that action very, very well, because it was almost as if everyone else was isolating them, including fellow African states. Mm-hmm. But this was the only person who was actually going to go and talk to them and listen to them and to find out what the situation was. And he came to the conclusion very quickly that isolation was not the way to deal with the problem, because isolation would only encourage a situation where the matter went underground. And as much as people were not provided with opportunities to travel through regular channels, they would find other means of doing it. Mm-hmm. And therefore it might take longer to detect the outbreak of the disease. And when there was the need to set up the Ebola Response Center, he offered that Ghana would headquarter the Ebola Response Center. And part of that also was in the interest of the Republic of Ghana. I mean, if all the logistics that are being used in the fight against Ebola are stored in Ghana, what that would mean is that in the worst case scenario, if we had an outbreak, we also would have the experts here on site to be able to assist us to deal with the challenge and not now have to wait for additional support to come. And in the event that supplies were being brought into the region, the first point of call would be in Ghana. Mm-hmm. But thankfully, we didn't have an incident of the Ebola virus. We allowed UN flights to come into Ghana from Liberia and from the other affected countries. And for a long time, those were the only flights available out of those countries. Until, again, within the framework of ECOWAS, President Ouattara also showed leadership and allowed Air Ivoire to continue its flights to the affected countries. And so the option to travel was either to get the UN flights or to get the Air Ivoire flight. Otherwise, you were stranded. And I know that for the countries that were affected by the Ebola virus, they saw this as an act of solidarity, and it has earned us a tremendous amount of goodwill in these states. Not only that, it allowed us to also put in place our own mechanisms and have, as I said, the technical expertise and support to make sure that our systems were ready to respond to an Ebola crisis. Of course, what that also meant was that we were getting information in real time as to how the disease was spreading and also when successes were achieved and when more and more countries were getting out of the Ebola situation because they had successfully been able to achieve a break in transmission. We also were updated with that information, so we knew what was happening in terms of the Ebola crisis in real time. What has happened now is that with Liberia, there has been a break in the transmission. They had 42 days without an incidence of the disease, so they had a ceremony to indicate that they were Ebola-free. Sierra Leone still has some cases, but it's very much on the downturn. Guinea still has some cases. The situation there is a bit worrying because remember that's where this started in the first place. But they still are recording lower incidences of the disease. And through that process, we have built within the region, we've built the capability of dealing with this, of having some capacity to deal with this. What we've also agreed going forward is that there's going to be a regional disease control center which will be established. Well, there's already a disease control center in Nigeria, so the Nigerian center is going to be the regional center, but every country will also have its own center and will build up its capacity to do research into these special diseases so that we now are better placed to be able to manage a crisis like this on a regional level if it recurs.
Now, in addition to Ebola, we now have the scourge of the Middle East respiratory disease, which broke out in the Gulf and the Middle East. And there have been reported cases of bird flu in Ghana. How are we looking at that in terms of our relations with other countries? How, for example, are we controlling migration, between Ghana and Japan and other places? Well, Saudi Arabia, for example, has also been hit by MERS.
Yes, and indeed, this is not the first time within our world that we've had outbreaks of a contagious disease in one part of the world or the other. But you would agree with me that before the outbreak of the Ebola virus, you didn't have public health officials at the airport waiting to scan you on arrival and take your temperature and ask you questions about where you had been and what had been your last contact and so on and so forth. So technically, if you came into the country with a disease, we really didn't know that you had come in perhaps with some anomaly, and therefore it was even more difficult to track you. Now we've put in place the mechanism to be able to do that. And across the West African framework, the West African region, one of the things that has been achieved by working together in the response to Ebola is that we now have improved our regional information management sharing systems so that we are in a position to check with each other and to understand what is happening in the different member states and as such prepare for it ourselves. And so as a matter of fact, because of this, as horrific as the Ebola experience was, it helped us to establish a capacity that really wasn't very much in existence before and which is necessary to be able to deal with further outbreaks of any kind of disease, including the
Middle
MERS
East respiratory
and also the avian flu.
Now, how about the territorial dispute between Ghana and La Côte d'Ivoire? How would that affect the effort to cooperate within the sub-region, fighting disease, improving our economies, adhering to democratic norms and so on? How will this territorial dispute affect us?
Maritime boundary disputes, not a territorial dispute. We're not talking about land. We're talking about the sea. But really, the point of going to the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea on the maritime boundary dispute is to resolve a dispute in an amicable manner according to the rule of law and to have certainty about our maritime boundary. So the method that we have adopted is with a view towards achieving certainty in order to bring, as it were, a mutually acceptable end to the dispute that will not give rise to any further debate on the issue. And so notwithstanding the fact that we do have this arbitration that is taking place, it hasn't prevented us from exchanging with Côte d'Ivoire and engaging with Côte d'Ivoire on matters affecting the region and on other matters where we have issues of mutual interest. And indeed, at the time when we began the arbitration proceedings against Côte d'Ivoire, I'm very much aware that President Mahama wrote to President Ouattara, explained the rationale for the action that we had taken. On the sides of the last UN General Assembly meeting, he and President Ouattara also met to discuss it. And as a result of, and have had subsequent meetings since then. And so as a result of which, we see this as a way to resolve a dispute without recourse to force or violence. And that's indeed the way that you would expect it to be carried out, when you are trying to deal with these matters peacefully and according to the rule of law.
There are reports that Mr. Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the UN, is playing a role in these negotiations. What role is that?
I wouldn't call them negotiations. You would recall that after the first ruling of the International Tribunal, when Côte d'Ivoire requested for interim measures, one of the things that the tribunal ruled on was that indeed the parties should come together to discuss how this particular ruling would be managed. And so further to that, there was the need for the parties to get together to have that discussion. Now, my understanding is that Mr. Kofi Annan offered to be, if you like, a mediator between the parties in helping them to come to some understandings on this issue. I think it was a useful step on his part. Indeed, he's a senior statesman, he's a Ghanaian, and with his international reputation, I think that it was commendable that he decided to play a role of that nature. And the discussions that were held at the level of the two presidents did yield some useful outcomes. Notwithstanding, the arbitration process is still continuing because we need to have a determination on the boundary. Even if at any point in time we are going to have a joint development of a particular area with Côte d'Ivoire, we still need to know where that line is because that will determine how revenue is shared. And so if we can do this in a manner that brings certainty and at the end of the day clarity to this situation, it's in both of our economic interests.
What is our assessment of the internal situation in La Côte d'Ivoire and how it may impinge on relations with Ghana? I'm talking, for example, about the trial of former President Gbagbo, the initial ruling of the ICC that there's not enough evidence to continue his trial, the fact that atrocities committed on the rebels' side, have not been punished. There's no effort to punish that. And also a recent UN report that the rebels who brought President Ouattara to power are arming themselves to the teeth and that they could even be better armed than the National Armed Forces.
Well, you've put together a number of issues, so let's sort of try and unpack them. With regards to the case against President Gbagbo, to the extent that the prosecuting tribunal says that there isn't enough evidence, I believe that in that case, what we expect to be the outcome is exactly what happened in the case against President Kenyatta, that the ICC will discontinue proceedings. Because if it admits that it doesn't have a basis to go forward, then it should discontinue proceedings. Now, when it comes to the outcomes of investigations that have been held and reports have been issued, such as you referred to, essentially what that means is that now the country involved has to take steps to deal with the situation. If we see within the context of the discussion within ECOWAS and within a mediation and security cooperation framework that things are not proceeding as one would expect, given that Côte d'Ivoire is going to have elections later on this year, also in October, then of course it will be a matter of concern that will be discussed and dealt with at the heads of state level. But I must hasten to add that remember that notwithstanding the fact that we are members of regional organizations, we still are sovereign states. And state sovereignty comes with a certain amount of independence, especially in decision-taking on internal matters. Mm-hmm. And so discussions within a regional framework, especially with a view to cooperating with each other to prevent crises before they erupt, are exchanges with a view to anticipate things that could go wrong, and then have the necessary dialogue and engagement to persuade those that need to act to do so before things come to a head. Usually when those kind of discussions take place, they are not advertised, they are not put in the public domain. It's the outcomes that we see. And to the extent that the outcome of such a discussion leads to the continued maintenance of peace, security, and indeed the wrong that has been identified is dealt with, then you say that there has been a successful intervention. without that intervention necessarily being highly publicized.
What is likely to happen in Burkina Faso? We're expecting them to go through an election.
Yes.
But given your knowledge of what has happened since the exit of Blaise Compaoré, what do you expect to happen?
We expect that there will be a credible election. Now, the reason why we say that is because we are aware that the new interim administration of Burkina Faso has passed legislation to the effect that anybody who was involved, actively involved, in trying to amend the constitution to take away the mandated term limits should not be eligible to contest as a candidate. They have also indicated in several meetings that that is not meant as a blanket disqualification for anyone from the previous to prevent anyone from the previous administration from contesting for elections. But, for instance, the main protagonist who was involved in pushing for the constitutional reform, obviously under that provision cannot contest for elections again. In any event, he was barred by the constitution and he was trying to change the status quo. So that obviously doesn't come up. And for people who were actively engaged in making that happen, they have told us that what they intend to do is to ensure that this election, which is very important, coming on the heels of the civil disturbance that resulted in the resignation of President Compaoré, has to be seen to create a fresh start. And this ban is not meant to be a ban in perpetuity. It is to ensure that there will be a fresh start and let a new government with a clear mandate then through the process of political stakeholder consultation now come up with a new framework for the conduct of election and indeed for any amendments that are required to their constitutional framework.
Well, viewers, we're going to take another short break at this juncture. We are in conversation with Madam Hanna Tetteh, Foreign Minister of Ghana. And when we come back from the break, I'd like to find out from her whether indeed she'll be contesting parliamentary elections and why. Short break. Welcome back to Hot Issues, and we are in conversation about Ghana's foreign policy. And we are particularly privileged to have with us the Foreign Minister herself, Madam Hanna Tetteh. Are you going to contest the parliamentary elections and why?
I am certainly going to contest in the parliamentary primaries for the ticket of the NDC in the Awutu-Senya West constituency. Now, assuming that I win the primaries, then I look forward to contesting in the 2016 elections, again on the ticket of the NDC. I don't take any election for granted, and therefore I can't answer your question with, yes, I'm going to contest the 2016 elections, because I know that there are processes that involve choices to be made, first at the party level as well as at the constituency level.
Are you not sufficiently busy as the Foreign Minister? Why would you want to add parliamentary duties?
Oh, I am busy as the Foreign Minister, but you know, I contest in Awutu-Senya West constituency because that's where I come from. My late father introduced me to the idea of contesting for parliamentary elections. And his rationale for getting me to do that was because he felt that once you had the opportunity and the benefits of education and exposure, you should try and give back to your community. And I think that for a politician, it's very important, no matter how busy you are, to maintain contact with the grassroots. And I think that being a member of parliament is really the best way to do that, because people come to you from all sections of society. It doesn't really matter whether they're your party members or not. But once you have to engage with them continuously, you have a real idea of what the issues that people have to deal with in their daily lives are. The tendency is once you are in a very high position of being a minister, you can have a certain amount of distance and detachment if you don't have that anchor. And for me, that is what being Member of Parliament for Awutu Senya West does for me, and that's the reason why I want to contest again.
Is that an indication that you don't have higher ambitions than being a minister?
I don't. And I've said this
Why not?
Because, at the end of the day, what is the higher position? The higher position is either to become a president or a vice president. I don't ever want to contest for president. Of staff. Oh, the chief of staff is, in the Act, his office is coterminous with the cabinet minister. So I really don't see that there's too much distinction, except that he plays
a supervisory role.
Coordinating role.
Okay.
A coordinating role between the office of the president and the different sector ministries. So really, it's the president or the vice president. I don't want to contest for president. The choice of vice president is the prerogative of a president. The choice of a vice presidential candidate is the prerogative of the presidential candidate. It's not something that you decide to do on your own. And I think that having had the opportunity to serve as a minister is a very high position. It comes with a lot of responsibility, and I'm happy to have had the opportunity and the privilege to be a minister.
Now, what happened at the Mayor's Conference in Accra?
Ask me. Well, what happened was that that morning, we were supposed to have a cabinet meeting, emergency cabinet meeting at 10 o'clock. And I got a call around 9:45 asking me, from the secretary to the president, asking me to represent the president at the opening of the Mayor's Conference and to deliver his speech. So I asked for the president's speech to be emailed to me, because obviously if you are speaking on behalf of the president, there would be an already prepared speech, so that I could go. And I was told that the conference starts at 10:30. Well, I had to be there for 10:30. Now, shortly after I had finished talking to the secretary to the president, the chief of protocol, who is a senior director at the foreign ministry, called me to say that, I had to get there quickly because actually it wasn't 10:30, it was for 10. And that the mayor had told him that the vice president was coming, but he didn't think so, because he had tried to call the vice president's protocol and he wasn't getting through to him. And he didn't want a situation where I would be the one who'd be accused of holding up the conference. So could I please get there as quickly as possible? So when I got there, when you get into the conference center, there's a VIP holding room before the main conference room. So everybody was in the VIP holding room. So as soon as I got there, I went and greeted. When you enter the VIP holding center, to your left, there's an office which the president usually uses when he comes to the conference center. And immediately outside that office, there's a suite of furniture. And so over there, we're sitting Honorable E.T. Mensah, former President Rawlings, the Deputy Regional Minister for Greater Accra, and a lady. So I greeted all of them. And then turned to the mayor and said, well, I'm here, so we can start. Then he says, no, we are waiting for the vice president. And I said, but I've been asked to come and read the speech. Then he says, no, he's just gotten off the phone with the president, and the vice president is coming. And I asked him, is he sure? Because that's not the instruction that I have had. And he says, yes. And I said, okay, fine. Then in that case, I'll wait to see if the vice president comes. But after that, I'm going, because I have cabinet. So if there's no reason for me to be here, then I'll take my leave. Then he says, why don't you wait and sit through the opening session? And I said, well, if I really don't have anything to do here, then sit through the opening session. And I have a meeting to attend.
A cabinet meeting?
A cabinet meeting. Then I'm rather going to go to the meeting. Then at that point, some other dignitaries who were invited to the conference came up. I had met them before at other international events, so I greeted all of them. And then went and sat across the other side of the room, waiting for the vice president to come. The vice president came. Where I was sitting, he wouldn't have seen me. The vice president came, immediately made a left towards the area where President Rawlings was seated. And upon his arrival, I got up and went out the other door and left, because I had made it clear that, once he came, I was going to leave. Admittedly, I didn't go and tell everybody who I had greeted that, now that the vice president had come, I was taking my leave.
But was that necessary? It wasn't necessary.
I didn't think it was.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I didn't do it. And I left. As far as I was concerned, that's what happened.
So why is there arrogance in all of this?
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I'm trying to find it. I can't, But how do you feel later when news of this was splashed on the net and so on, and there were accusations against you, and some direct attack on your person and so on? How did you feel?
Well, in politics, you get used to the fact that there are bound to be attacks on your person. If you don't expect to be attacked, then you are not ready to do this job. But what surprised me was that all of this took place on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And the story broke, as I understood it, on Wednesday, 2 days later. And the way that it broke, the impression was given that probably it was in the main hall of the conference room, and I had walked out of the main hall because I wasn't given the opportunity to read the speech. And there was nothing of the kind. There's absolutely nothing of the kind.
But the comments about you were in the main hall. Some of the comments about you were in the main hall.
I am very much aware of that. For one, I cannot pretend to understand why President Rawlings felt it was necessary to make those comments. And I can't answer for him. But as far as I'm concerned, you asked me what happened. This is what happened.
Well, I'm looking for an opportunity to ask the president why he has appointed so many arrogant people around him. And I hope I get that opportunity one day.
Tell me, why would you ask him such a question?
That's one of the allegations which was made. That he's a nice guy, he's modest and so on, but he has so many arrogant people around him.
I think that one of the challenges in our country is that when you are not known to say yes all the time, especially in a situation where people expect you to say yes or to be ready to be amenable to whatever suggestions are brought before you, you are either difficult or you are arrogant.
Especially when you're a woman.
Well, maybe. I mean, for instance, you can't imagine the number of times I get requests for me to write a note on my complimentary card so that someone can go and get a visa from one of these foreign missions. I am not a visa contractor. I'm not writing a note on my complimentary card for anybody to go and get a visa at any embassy, because the next thing will be the Minister of Foreign Affairs uses her position to apply for visas for so and so. It's not happening. Or sometimes it is a request for a diplomatic passport. You know the issues I've had with the passport section. And I'm trying to streamline and bring sanity to the place, and we're going through a process of prosecuting even people who have been seen to take advantage of the process and abuse it to give people diplomatic passports that they were not entitled to. So if I'm going through a process of streamlining and insisting that the staff in the office do what I have asked them to do, I cannot be the same person who asks them to break the rules and to give it to people who are not entitled to it. And these are just a couple of examples, Kwesi. I could go on and take many more. But my point of view is this. When you are a Minister of State, when you swear that oath of office, and you swear that you are going to uphold the laws of the Republic of Ghana, you have a responsibility to run your office in that manner. It means that you are not always going to be in a position to do what people want you to do or people think you could do if you were to be a bit flexible. But the question is that really what we need?
Now, finally, what kind of relations should we expect between President Buhari of Nigeria and President Mahama? Are there some difficulties?
No, not to my knowledge. I would say that they are going to have a good relationship. I mean, prior to the elections, you know that President Mahama visited Nigeria a couple of times, had meetings with both former President Goodluck Jonathan and also, at that time, presidential candidate Buhari, and had engagement with them with a view to discussing and making sure that everything possible was done to ensure a peaceful, credible election for Nigeria. And I must say that the relations between both gentlemen, that is, between President Mahama and President Jonathan, and President Mahama and President Buhari, went very well. And subsequent to that, they have had contact. And so I don't see any reason why there should not be good relations between President Mahama and President Buhari. To the best of my knowledge, things are okay.
But it does appear that a section of the Ghanaian opposition is deliberately and publicly cozying up to General Buhari. Is that not a problem?
Well, if you are cozying up to General Buhari in the media, it's not the same as cozying up to him in person, is it?
I don't know.
I don't think so. So creating... I've heard a lot of debates about the Nigerian election, especially as the collation of the results were taking place. Indeed, if you follow the discussion on social media, you had the impression that it was thought that, well, if President Buhari could beat President Jonathan, then it necessarily meant that the NPP's candidate would be in a position to beat President Mahama. The circumstances of the two countries are not entirely, in fact, are not the same. I wouldn't even say are not entirely the same. And somehow I think there's been an effort to juxtapose that into meaning there should be a better relationship between President Buhari and the NPP's candidate than between President Buhari and President Mahama. But the truth of the matter is that President Mahama has many more opportunities to engage with President Buhari because both of them are heads of state, that the engagement between them up to this point has been cordial and has gone well. And so there's absolutely no reason to think that that will change in future.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
very much. Well, viewers, we've had a conversation with Madam Hanna Tetteh, the Foreign Minister of Ghana. And I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope we've all learnt a thing or two. It's goodbye from all of us from TV3. Goodbye until we meet again. Bye-bye.